Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Cogo here, and yes, I am sitting in the street next to a sewer grate. I've taken you on many locations for these chapter books. This one might be the craziest one yet, but thank heavens I'm on my street and I've lived here a very, very long time, so they know me on this street and know that I will do some crazy things in the name of teaching. So, brings me to chapter 2 today of Flat Stanley, and it is called Being Flat. And Flat Stanley is written by Jeff Brown and pictures by Scott Nash, and you'll find out in chapter 2 why I'm sitting here. All right, chapter 2, Being Flat. When Stanley got used to being flat, he enjoyed it. He could go in and out of rooms, even when the door was closed, just by lying down and sliding through the crack at the bottom. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop said it was silly, but they were actually quite proud of him. Arthur got jealous and tried to slide under a door, but he just banged his head. Being flat could also be helpful, Stanley found. He was taking a walk with Mrs. Lambchop one afternoon when her favorite ring fell from her finger. The ring rolled across the sidewalk and down between the bars of the grating that covered a deep, dark shaft. Mrs. Lambchop began to cry. That's, I think, how I would feel if my rings rolled off and fell into the deep, dark shaft of the sewer. I have an idea, Stanley said. He took the laces out of his shoes and an extra pair out of his pocket and tied them all together to make one long lace. Then he tied one end of that to the back of his belt and gave the other one to his mother. "Lower me," he said, "and I will look for the ring." "Thank you, Stanley," Mrs. Lambchop said. She lowered him between the bars and moved him carefully up and down, from side to side, so that he could search the whole floor of the shaft. Two policemen came by and stared at Mrs. Lambchop as she stood holding the long lace that ran down through the grating. She just pretended not to notice them. What's the matter, lady?" the first police officer asked. "Is your yo-yo stuck?" "I'm not playing with a yo-yo," Mrs. Lambchop said sharply. "My son is at the other end of this lace, if you must know." "Get the net, Harry," said the second police officer. "I think we've caught a mom that's gone a little bit crazy." There's probably a few of us out there right now. Just then, down the shaft, Stanley cried out, "Hooray!" Mrs. Lambchop pulled him up and saw that he had indeed found her ring. "Good for you, Stanley," she said. Then she turned angrily to the policeman. Lost my mind indeed," she said. The policeman apologized. "We didn't get it, lady," they said. And we might have been a little hasty. We can see that now." "People should think twice before making rude remarks," said Mrs. Lambchop, "and then not make them at all." Ooh, the neighbor's dog startled me. The policeman realized that that was a good rule and said that they would try to remember it. One day, Stanley got a letter from his friend Thomas Anthony Jeffrey, whose family had recently moved to California. A school vacation was about to begin, and Stanley was invited to spend it with the Jeffreys. "Oh boy," Stanley said, "I would love to go." Mrs. Lambchop sighed. "A round-trip train or airplane ticket to California is going to be very expensive, Stanley," she said. "I will have to think of some cheaper way." When Mr. Lambchop came home from the office that evening, he brought with him an enormous brown paper envelope. "Now then, Stanley," he said, "try this on for size." Kind of like your mom might ask you to try on some new clothes. The envelope fit Stanley very well. There was even room left over. Mrs. Lambchop discovered, so she put in an egg salad sandwich made with very thin bread, a toothbrush case filled with milk. They had to put many stamps on the envelope to pay for both airmail and insurance. but it was still much less expensive than trying to buy a train or airplane ticket to go to California. The next day, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop slid Stanley into his envelope along with the egg salad sandwich and the toothbrush case full of milk and mailed him from the box on the corner. The envelope had to be folded to fit through the slot, but Stanley was a limber little boy, and inside the box he straightened up just right again. Mrs. Lambchop was nervous because Stanley had never been away from home before. She knocked on the mailbox. "Can you hear me, dear?" she called. "Are you all right?" Stanley's voice came quite clearly. "I'm fine. Can I eat my sandwich now?" "Oh, wait an hour and try not to get overheated, dear," Mrs. Lambchop said. Then she and Mr. Lambchop cried out, "Goodbye, goodbye," and they left Stanley in the mailbox and went home. Stanley had a fine time in California. When the visit was over, the Jeffreys returned him in a beautiful white envelope they had made themselves. It had red and blue markings to show that it was airmail, and Thomas Jeffrey had labeled it valuable and fragile and this end up on both sides. Back home, Stanley told his family that he had been handled so carefully he never felt a single bump. Mr. Lambchop said it proved that jet planes are wonderful, and so is the Postal Service, and that it was a great age in which to live. Stanley thought so too. Now, putting a child in the mail, of course, is quite imaginative, but we have lost a few things a time or two down this sewer through the years. I will admit that. All right, thanks for tuning in today for Flat Stanley, and I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye-bye.